In just 6 weeks, the United States lost over $9.3 billion in farm product orders. Why? Because many countries don't want to buy food from the US anymore. They are now buying from Canada instead. Canada used to be a small player in farming. But now, Canada is becoming a top food exporter. While American farmers are watching soybeans and beef go unsold, Canada's food exports went up by 37% in May and June 2025. This is the biggest increase in over 20 years. Let's take a closer look. Canada's food export boom. 5 major countries stopped buying food from the US. This is not just about food. It also affects people's jobs and the economy. This information comes from reports and data. It is not meant to blame anyone. Number 1. G7 countries back away. No one thought America's closest friends would leave first. But 5 countries from the G7 have reduced their orders. These countries are Japan, the UK, France, Germany, and Italy. In 2023, these countries bought $74 billion in US farm products. That was 1/4 of all US farm exports. Their orders helped farming states like Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Illinois, and Wisconsin. But by June 2025, things changed. At a big world meeting, the US president left early. No trade deals were made. After that, leaders from Canada, Europe, and Japan met in private. They talked about one big topic: food. Food prices are going up. Global supply chains are weak. The US looks unstable because of politics. But Canada looks calm and reliable. In June 2025, Canada's food exports to G7 countries went up nearly 20%. Each country had its own reason, but all of them made the same choice: buy from Canada. Japan started buying Canadian beef and wheat. Germany and France signed long deals for Canadian dairy and grains. The UK used to buy soybeans from the US. Now 40% of its orders go to Alberta and Saskatchewan in Canada. This isn't just about numbers. It is affecting the whole Midwest. Corn prices in Iowa are the lowest in 10 years. Kansas has so many soybeans that the government had to help store them. In June, a report said corn and soybean supplies were over 52 million tons. That's the highest since 2013. And the next harvest is almost here. Banks in Nebraska and other farm states have stopped giving new loans to farmers. They are unsure if farmers will be able to sell their crops. Big projects for food storage and packaging are now on hold. The US government also has money problems. A tax relief plan for farmers is ending soon. If it's not renewed, farmers will have to pay billions in extra taxes. This is happening at the worst time when they are losing customers. This is no longer just a trade issue. It's about trust. Other countries don't trust the US like they used to. Even many Americans are losing faith. America used to be the breadbasket of the world. Now, Canadian food is arriving in Europe and Asia. Beef from Alberta is reaching Tokyo. Milk and grains from Saskatchewan are replacing US products. If you live in a quiet Canadian farm town, you can feel the change. There are more trucks. Farmers are building bigger storage areas. Something big is happening. Canada is not winning because it beat the US, it's winning because it stayed steady while the US had problems. In the second quarter of 2025, the US lost about $6 billion in exports compared to last year. Canada's exports went up by 13%. Most of these new deals used to go to the US. If even Japan, Germany, and the UK are turning away, then who will still trade with the US? Number 2, Mexico is changing too. Something is happening at the southern border. Mexico was once America's closest trading partner. Now, Mexico is working more with Canada. The US is being left out. This is bad news for US farmers. They relied a lot on selling food to Mexico. In 2024, the US sold over $31 billion in farm goods to Mexico. But in 2025, things started to change. There were delays. Longer customs checks. Trade talks were paused. Then, the US government increased immigration checks. They also used trade rules as a political tool. Reports said immigration agents were near farms and factories. Many workers were scared and stopped going to work. This slowed down farm production and deliveries. Mexico saw all this and started to think, we can't depend on the US anymore. Mexico used to depend heavily on farm products from the US, but every time the US made a sudden policy change, it put Mexico's food system at risk. So Mexico turned to a new partner, Canada. Canada is nearby, not risky, and doesn't tie trade to politics. In April 2025, Canadian officials started visiting Mexico City. By mid-June, Mexico and Canada signed a trade deal worth over $5 billion. The deal focused on soybeans, frozen meat, wheat, and dairy products. These are the same products that used to come mostly from American farmers. Soon after, Canadian food shipments began arriving at the port of Veracruz. Meanwhile, US food containers were stuck in warehouses. No one was unloading them. They were stuck because of paperwork issues and no set delivery times. Mexico was changing its main supplier. According to KuBank, US food exports to Mexico dropped by nearly 18% in the second quarter of 2025. At the same time, Canadian exports to Mexico went up 16%. That's Canada's biggest increase in over 10 years. In US states like Texas, Arizona, Iowa, and Nebraska, the mood has turned sad. Refrigerated trucks that once worked day and night now sit unused. Silos full of corn and soybeans are stuck. Old trade deals are paused. New ones haven't started yet. Banks are asking farmers to show proof that they can sell their crops before giving out seasonal loans. But farmers say there's no way to prove anything when their biggest buyer just left. The worst feeling is being pushed out by neighbors they once trusted. Canada was a major partner, but not very close emotionally. Mexico was next door, easy to reach, and shared many habits and seasons. Now Canada and Mexico are working together. And most Americans are only hearing about it through news reports. In Mexico, the choice to buy from Canada wasn't about anger. It was a smart trade decision. They didn't want to be affected by US politics anymore. From budgets and elections to farm taxes and labor rules, everything in the US feels unstable. Mexican companies don't want to sign 3-year contracts with a country that might change its rules in 3 months. Inside Mexico's food industry, people now talk about one goal: reducing risk. Canada is seen as a safe, steady partner. It doesn't share a border with Mexico, but it has a strong history of being stable. Meanwhile, the US is distracted by political fights. The Department of Agriculture is just writing reports and warnings. Farm groups are asking for help and sending letters. But with the world focused on other things like wars and inflation, these cries go unheard. And now something more serious is happening. It's not just Mexico making changes. A big industrial country in Asia is also thinking about switching partners. For them, having a steady food supply is a must. If Canada can provide that, they are ready to make the switch. When two close friends begin to walk away, it's time for the US to ask, what's pushing our partners away? And is there anyone left who will wait for us to come back? Number 3, South Korea steps back. South Korea still trusts the US in technology and defense. But when it comes to food, it's starting to walk away. Over the last 20 years, South Korea has been one of the most reliable buyers of American farm products. In 2024, the US sent over $7.8 billion in food to South Korea. This included soybeans, corn, pork, and beef. Many American farms in the Midwest even follow South Korean rules just to sell to them. That's because South Korea pays more for high-quality, safe food. But in 2025, things started to change. The change didn't come from farmers. It came from the South Korean government. Early in the year, trade fights got worse. The US added new tariffs as part of its own domestic policies. That made South Korea worry. What if food shipments from the US suddenly stopped? The Korean Ministry of Agriculture activated a 90-day backup plan. It was made in case U.S. food exports were delayed or cancelled. This wasn't just a small warning. It showed that South Korea was thinking seriously about other options. Then Canada stepped in. They didn't pressure anyone. They made a simple offer: stable food supply, good prices, and no politics. By June, South Korea and Canada signed contracts worth over $560 million. These contracts were for grains, dairy, and frozen meat. They last until 2029. According to Bloomberg, the total order value might grow even more. Big supermarket chains in South Korea are now choosing products labeled "Product of Canada." This change didn't make big headlines. But people in the shipping and export industry noticed. They called it a silent earthquake. The port of Busan, which used to receive lots of U.S. food, now sees more and more containers with the maple leaf flag of Canada. Data shows Canadian food exports to South Korea rose by 14% in the second quarter of 2025. That's the biggest jump since 2011. At the same time, U.S. food exports to Northeast Asia fell by $1.2 billion. Most of that loss came from South Korea. You can see the impact in U.S. states like Iowa, Minnesota, and Nebraska. These places used to count on South Korea as a top buyer. Now, hundreds of farms are changing their plans. Banks have stopped giving out new seasonal loans. Warehouses near the Mississippi River are quiet. The supply chain between the Midwest and the Port of New Orleans is shrinking. But more than the lost money, farmers feel hurt by the uncertainty. They spent years upgrading equipment and facilities to meet South Korea's rules. They kept their promises on quality. But none of it matters if buyers don't trust U.S. policies anymore. South Korea didn't make a big statement. But trade experts understand what's happening. South Korea still works with the U.S. in technology. But when it comes to food, they don't want to depend on a country with unstable rules. Canada is everything South Korea wants now: calm, steady, and free from political surprises. For South Korea, that was enough reason to change their long-term supply plans. A heavy silence spread across rural America when this news came out. Farmers started getting phone calls from shipping companies canceling their contracts. Emails came in from buyers asking to pause deliveries. Some South Korean food companies cut their orders of American goods by 25 to 30%. This information comes from the International Food Inspection Standards Group. This shows a strange problem. The U.S. still makes some of the best farm products in the world. But in today's market, quality alone is not enough. People also want stability and trust. Many older American farmers used to think South Korea would never leave. Even during COVID, they stayed loyal. But now, even South Korea is pulling back. That makes many farmers feel very nervous. They're asking, what is happening to America's role in global farming trade? This is not just a small loss. It's a big warning for the future. If things keep changing and policies stay uncertain, even close trading partners will walk away not out of anger, but because it's too risky. South Korea, a country known for being careful, might just be the first to leave. Number 4, the Netherlands. If there's one place where American farm products enter Europe, it's the Netherlands. The port of Rotterdam is the largest shipping hub in Europe. It connects food products from around the world to all of Western Europe. For decades, U.S. goods like grain, soybeans, beef, and pork passed through Rotterdam. Farmers in Iowa and Illinois often said, to get into Europe, you have to go through the Netherlands first. But in early 2025, that started to change quietly. Stats from Eurostat and the Dutch government show a big shift. U.S. food imports through Rotterdam dropped by more than 25% compared to last year. At the same time, Canadian food imports rose nearly 22%. The reason? Changes in customs rules, inspection processes, and quarantine policies. These small things became major deciding factors. The Netherlands didn't stop buying from the US, they just picked the partner who delivers on time, with fewer problems. Canada arrived at the perfect time. They had the seeded trade deal and years of steady farm policies. This change didn't just affect Europe. It hit the US hard, especially in the Midwest. The US shipping system from states like Illinois and Ohio to the port of New Orleans was built to serve the Rotterdam route. When ships can't dock on time, storage centers fill up. USDA says corn and soybean stockpiles rose more than 26% in the second quarter. Warehouses had to stop taking in new product. Some rural banks stopped giving short-term loans. They were scared about rising trade risks. Experts say losing access to Rotterdam may cost the US up to $1.4 billion in lost farm exports in just one quarter. The biggest losses came from corn, soybeans, and processed meats. But this is not just about money. When a main port like Rotterdam stops working as expected, the whole US transport system feels it. Barge traffic on the Mississippi River dropped. Some shipping companies cut hours or shut down completely. Truck deliveries from warehouses to ports dropped by 30 to 40% in 3 months. Soybean plants in Illinois and Missouri that served the European market reduced their work. Hundreds of workers were sent home without pay. The mood in farm towns turned gloomy. People asked, was the dream of selling to Europe too good to last? And if Rotterdam isn't an option anymore, where will our food go? Older farmers who once saved their season with one export deal to Europe now watch as Canada's containers are unloaded in Rotterdam, while US products sit on the west coast, waiting for approval. No one is saying it directly, but everyone can feel that something is being lost. Meanwhile, in Canada, the picture is very different. Canada's shipments from Halifax and Vancouver to Europe rose 19% in the second quarter. Canadian farmers are getting better loan options. They are building more cold storage and packing centers. Shipping companies now prefer to send containers from Canada to Rotterdam. That almost never happened before. So the real question is not, who won? Who is ready? The US has great farm products. But Canada has clear trade routes. The US has a long history. But Canada has working agreements. In today's world, being reliable is the most important thing. A small delay at customs can damage an entire export plan. For Americans who saw Rotterdam as the key to Europe, this is not just a lost market. It feels like losing a part of their hope. They are losing a trade route they once thought could never change. Now, without the Dutch port to launch exports, many are questioning US trade policy not to blame, but to understand. What can we do if the world changes direction without waiting for us? Rotterdam was once the start of the US path into Europe. Now, it's opening its doors to other countries. No one is closing the door on America. But no one is waiting for America either. And the most worrying thing is this isn't the end. There's still one more country to talk about. A place that used to look like a future friend. But now, even that door is beginning to close. Number 5, Indonesia. At the end of May 2025, something surprising happened. 4 shipments of American soybeans were supposed to go to Jakarta. But Indonesia changed its mind. They sent the ships back not because of weather or problems, but because they chose Canada instead. Why? Because Canada was faster, more stable, and less risky. To many Americans, Indonesia may seem far away. But to farmers in the Midwest, Indonesia was full of hope. It was a growing market. Its people were eating more. And when Europe became less dependable, Southeast Asia looked like the next big opportunity. Indonesia was at the center of that opportunity. In 2024, the US sold over $4.2 billion in farm goods to Indonesia. This included soybeans, dried corn, frozen beef, and powdered milk. Many US farms even changed how they worked to meet halal standards. Some signed long-term deals to build storage centers near West Coast ports. But in early 2025, things shifted. At a big meeting in Bali, Canada and Indonesia quietly signed agreements lasting until 2030. These deals covered food, shipping, and logistics. It wasn't just about selling. It was a long-term strategy. It included cold storage centers, food preservation stations, and special transport routes just for Canadian goods. The Indonesian government said it picked Canada for one reason: Canada is reliable and sticks to its promises. American farm goods were facing policy problems. Losing Indonesia didn't feel like losing an old friend. It felt like losing the future. Like watching a new chance disappear right in front of you. For younger American farmers, who believed Indonesia would be their next big customer, this change was more than just another export loss. It was the loss of what could have been. Many American farmers had placed their hopes in Southeast Asia to reduce their dependence on older markets. But the change happened fast, and no one was ready for it. According to KuBank, in just the second quarter of 2025, the U.S. may have lost $6.7 billion in farm exports to Indonesia. And that's just the beginning. If more countries in ASEAN follow the same path, the U.S. could lose over $4 billion every year. These numbers don't just show up on stock markets. They show up in fields, in farms, and in small towns where people depend on farming to survive. What's worse is that this is not just about Indonesia. Indonesia is a hub. It influences other countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, and Thailand. When Indonesia changes how it buys food, others start to follow. Canada saw this coming and got ready early. Data from Statistics Canada shows that container shipments from Vancouver and Halifax to Indonesia's ports grew by 23% in just 3 months. Canada also built more cold storage facilities and gave money to farm groups in Saskatchewan and Alberta to increase production. Meanwhile, the U.S. had not even sent a top trade official to Indonesia in 2025. That silence gave Indonesia a reason to move forward without waiting for America. For Americans in the Midwest, this is not just about exports. It's about livelihoods. In small towns where 80% of income comes from a single export deal, the mood is getting darker. Banks are afraid to give out loans. Grain piles up with nowhere to go. Factories are cutting worker hours. Canada didn't just win a few deals. They're now turning Indonesia into their own center for selling food across Southeast Asia. With the CPTPP agreement and smart investments, they're building a supply chain that will be hard for the U.S. to enter even if it wants to come back later. And once people in Southeast Asia get used to Canadian packaging, food labels, and rules, it will be slow and expensive to win them back. So now, we must ask, if the U.S. can't keep its leadership in Southeast Asia, a region we once called a top priority, then who will? And will we realize it too late? Indonesia didn't reject America with loud words. They simply made a decision based on trust. They picked a partner that was stable and reliable. If a young and growing market like Indonesia can turn away first, then it's time for America to rethink its entire trade strategy. Farmers in the U.S. invested time, money, and hope into these markets. But they were never the problem. The real question is, who is making decisions for them? And is anyone listening to their concerns? Indonesia isn't just another name on the list. It's the last domino to fall, the final sign that a big shift has happened. What's been lost is more than just a customer. It's a sense of trust. It's a future that might now belong to someone else. The U.S. used to be called the breadbasket of the world. But in less than 6 months, 5 major trade partners, nations that once supported U.S. farmers, have slowly turned away. Now, they're buying from Canada instead. You don't need a press release to see this. Just look at the ports. More and more containers with the red maple leaf are arriving. American goods are being left in warehouses, returned, or canceled at the last moment. Behind these numbers are millions of Americans asking the same question: what do we do now? Maybe it's time for the U.S. to focus not just on growing food but on building better logistics, stable policies, and clear, trusted trade deals. Because in today's world, good quality isn't enough. You also need long-term commitment. This video is not about blame. It's about reflection. If you found this content helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Let's talk about the hard truths that big media often ignores.